The Cincinnati Reds need to continue making roster moves to fix the one glaring statistic that is pointing to their downfall.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Reds. My name is Jeff Carr, and on today's Locked On Reds podcast, a little bit later on, we will be joined by Ryan Finkelstein from Locked On Mets as I ask them just how much is enough to pay for a major league roster. We'll get his perspective on that and a couple of other great things there. And then in just a few minutes, we're going to look at some positive injury updates, including the fact that the Reds' other ace, Hunter Greene, is progressing nicely. But we're going to begin with the one statistic that is so concerning with this Reds ball club and why they need to keep making the roster changes that they've been making to fix it. Because as the Reds move along, they are currently 29-26 after losing the finale to the Mets. It was a frustrating game, but those are just one of those baseball games, right? Just one of those things where things just don't go your way. 19 base runners, only 2 of them score. Blech, it was awful. I wanted to grind my teeth. I wanted to gouge my eyes out. That was a rough game. But the good news is they won the series, and they need to stacking those series wins as we move through the season. That was their 10th series win of the year. However, they're still 4th in the division. They're 5 games back of the Milwaukee Brewers. And there is one statistic that everyone is pointing to that is pointing to the Reds' downfall, at least at this moment. That's why we're seeing the urgency with the roster. Because when you look at where the Reds are sitting, and they need to continue to make a move, and I want to address Edwin Arroyo idea in just a moment, but where the Reds currently set seems all right. Being above 500, it feels like you're still within striking distance. You know, a good week gets you right back where you need to be. Although the Brewers are really starting to build on themselves, but at the same time, the Reds aren't out of this thing by any stretch. The problem is when you start to look a little bit deeper at the standings, because when you break down the Reds' positioning against their divisional rivals, not just in the division rival record where the Reds only have 2 wins compared to 10 losses against their NL Central foes, it's also in the run differential. Now, this is a stat that I have tried to push back on because I believe, all right, sure, run differential this, run differential that, that's fine. As long as you win ball games, I don't care what your run differential is. And ideally, that's, a good thing to have. But right now, the Reds have the worst run differential in the division, and there's a very key reason as to why that is so important. Because the Reds are comparing themselves and trying to go for this thing, trying to win the division, trying to go forward into the postseason. And, we're all here to win the big thing, right? Like, unless you are hiding under a rock, I don't know what the parameter is here. Like, look, if you're a Major League Baseball player, if you're a Major League manager, if you're a Major League general manager, if you're a Major League Baseball team, your goal should be to win the World Series. And I looked back at the last 50 World Series. Do you know how many of those World Series included teams with negative run differentials? 2. Only 2. 2023, the Arizona Diamondbacks had a negative run differential. And 1987, the Cardinals had the Minnesota Twins had a negative run differential. They're the only team in the last 50 years to win a World Series with a negative run differential. This is a black mark on any ball club that aspires to be a good postseason ball club. In fact, there is, I went even further than this, that in the last 50 years, only 17 of those World Series were won by teams with a run differential of less than positive 100. So, sure, okay. Jeff, we really just want to advance in the postseason. We just want to win the division. We want to see the Reds get there before we really start looking at the ultimate goal. Negative 26 is where their run differential stands. Now, if you go back to the day where they lost their 8th straight, the Reds' run differential was at -40, so it's gotten better. But it needs to keep getting better. And one of the big things that the Reds have been doing to improve that is roster movement. We've seen some guys sent down. We've seen some guys DFA'd. We've seen some guys get benched, sent to the IL, all this stuff. They don't need to stop because there's a dude they need to pull up from AAA right now. It needs to be Edwin Arroyo. I'm done watching highlights from him wearing a Bats uniform. He needs to be making highlights wearing a Reds uniform. And there's some different takes out there as to how this could happen. In fact, Charlie Goldsmith, who's been on the show before, and he does an amazing job covering the Reds, had a very interesting idea for the Edwin Arroyo of it all, to call him up, to play him some days at second, to play him some days at third, and then to bring him off the bench when needed in the days when he doesn't start. But I say, why finagle it that way? Just call him up and send Matt McLain down. Matt McLain has options. Matt McLain has struggled. Matt McLain needs to rebuild his confidence. And I finally have Steve on my side with that take. If you watched 2 episodes ago, I believe, it was in our final segment we discussed this. But you bring up Edwin Arroyo, you play him every day at second base, and you chug along. Because I think that's another step forward. I don't think that Edwin Arroyo by himself fixes all of this, and the Reds just continue to score runs and bunches. I like what the lineup has done. But the Reds lineup can get better by adding Edwin Arroyo. You also get that mystique of calling up a top prospect and seeing him debut and all this other stuff that I think that will bring with it some good vibes and add to the potential of this lineup. There's so much about Edwin Arroyo that adds to the roster. Now, one of the big things that we were talking about a little bit ago was that he could be called up and Ke'Bryan Hayes could just not play. We didn't think there was going to be an IL stint. But certainly third base is open. And maybe Edwin Arroyo plays there a day or two. But I think that he should just be called up and be the everyday second baseman at this point. At least for a good long while. Because Matt McLain is not going to figure it out in a part-time role. Whatever the plan might be, if you bring up Edwin Arroyo and you say, okay, Edwin, you play on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Saturdays, and McLain, you play on Mondays and Thursdays and Sundays, or, whatever. I don't think that helps out Matt McLain, and I don't think that helps out Edwin Arroyo. I think continuity is the thing to really do here when it comes to Arroyo and McLain. Send him down to AAA, let him play every day. Because right now, Noelvi Marte has built up some confidence, man, and there's a conversation that we're going to have here soon, and I want to have it with Steve on tomorrow's show. He's not able to be with me today, but he'll be back on tomorrow's show. And that is it time to look at either Noelvi Marte or Hector Rodriguez for the outfield? And I think that's the move for TJ Friedl or Will Benson, or however you want to move that. Heck, send them both down. Because they're both kind of in this weird support bench role, barely playing. But I think that ultimately there are some opportunities here for the Reds to continue to get this roster better, and they need to focus on that. There's no more of this, let's just wait this guy out. He's having a rough go of it. We're almost to June. We know what we know, or at least we're beginning to know what we know at this point. Insane sample size and all those things, that's going by the wayside. And right now the Reds have a negative run differential. They have got to repair that. That has got to get better, because that is a huge indicator of postseason success. Coming up next, the Reds have some awesome injury updates, including their other ace and his hopefully soon return. The NHL playoffs are here, where every shift matters, every moment is intense, and the pressure is at its highest. And just like performance matters on the ice, it matters off the ice too. And that's where Rushiet comes in. Rushiet offers treatments designed to help you get ready and stay ready when it matters most. Their top option, Rugiet Ready, combines clinically proven ingredients in a simple mint that dissolves under your tongue. And they also offer Go Long, designed to help with both performance and control. It's all about confidence and feeling like yourself again. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNHL and get 15% off your ED treatment. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNHL for 15% off. Rugiet, performance medicine for men. Thanks for making Locked On Reds part of your day. Thanks for making us your first listen, and thanks for helping make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network in the country. Look, you already make us your team every single day. I would like to invite you to take it up a notch. Go ad-free, join the Locked On Reds Everydayer Club, and you also get access to a Locked On swag store. So much is in store for you. Go to lockedonreds.supercast.com or just follow the link down in the show description to learn more about it. Great opportunities abound if you follow that link. All right, the Reds got some great news as Hunter Greene is throwing bullpen sessions now. That's a fantastic update that happened actually on Tuesday, not on Wednesday. But he threw 15 to 20 pitches in Arizona over the bullpen side session. When the Reds return home for their homestand that starts this weekend against the Braves, Hunter Greene will be with the team. And I love to hear this because we are starting to progress in the right direction. There were reports whenever it first was said that he had bone chips, or they said foreign bodies at the time. They didn't call them bone chips, but he had some junk in his elbow that needed cleaned up, and he got that surgery and all that stuff. They said, all right, we're kind of targeting July for his return. And so for my brain and how I perceive pitching injuries, I try to go as conservative as possible. There is absolutely no reason to go overly optimistic, especially when you're talking about the Reds medical staff. But I was thinking after the All-Star break, depending on how this all moves along, he might even be in before the All-Star break. But the point is, the bullpen sessions will continue. He'll be throwing bullpen sessions in Cincinnati. Then he'll go back to Arizona whenever the Reds hit the road again. And he'll continue his rehab that way. I would expect, probably second week of June, he is sent off to AAA or Dayton or somewhere to begin rehab outings in the minor leagues, and then we'll probably see him throw a handful of those because essentially he is restarting spring training for himself. We talked about this with Nick Lodolo, where it felt like he was given a little bit of an opportunity to rehab, and then they're like, okay, do the rest of the rehab in the majors because we need you. Thankfully, they've got a little bit of cushion here for Hunter that he can kind of work on this at the correct speed, in the correct locations, and get right before getting called back up to the major league side and getting going here. The good news is once they begin that rehab process, that's a 28-day process that they have a window in which they can work him out in. So it's not as if they have indefinitely to pitch him in the minor leagues to get ready, and it's not as if they only have like 2 weeks. So he's got plenty of time there. The other part of this is that Rhett Lowder threw live BP in what amounted to about 3 innings worth of work the other day. And all reports were, as media talked with him and folks were talking about his bullpen session, that he looked fine. He was recovering fine and all that good stuff. He could be back into the starting pitcher mix here soon. These are 2 massive updates for a couple of different reasons. Obviously, adding talent to the starting rotation is always a good thing. But there are 2 guys that the Reds really need to manage. And both of them are 2 very different circumstances, but between Brady Singer and Chase Burns, the more the merrier when it comes to having starting rotation options. Because with Brady Singer, I think we're going to end up seeing him this weekend against the Braves, and hopefully he can start to get right, but he has been wrong for a while. And maybe it's the case that, they were able to skip a start this past week. He got some extra rest. Maybe that's going to help him. If it doesn't, I think we need some sort of phantom IL stent or something, ERA-itis. And he sits for a little bit longer than just a week, because you'll be able to bring Rhett Lowder back and plug him into that spot. I believe that one of the reasons Rhett Lowder was so ineffective in his last couple of starts before hitting the IL is because he was dealing with the beginnings of whatever the little shoulder clicking thing was that he had. Again, all reports were the MRIs came up negative. There was no structural damage. There was nothing crazy wrong with him. They just did this out of precautions. So I don't even necessarily know that he's going to have a rehab start. He's probably just going to be back with the team here soon. But that being said, Brady Singer is a guy that the Reds need to keep their eye on as far as managing the rotation goes. And then likely whenever Hunter Greene comes back, I kind of wonder if we have a bit of a maintenance IL stint for Chase Burns. I know that we had this conversation, Steve and I did, about ways that the Reds could manage his innings load and his workload as the season moved along. But I feel like July would be the time to really kick that into gear, maybe skip a couple of starts here and there. Because if you put him on like a little 15-day IL stint, you keep him throwing bullpens and all that other stuff during it. You keep him working out during the IL stint. But then you bring him back after that. Then you've managed his innings a bit. And then you can skip a start here and there when you have multiple off days or something like that in a stretch that I think that you can really... Not to the point where you're shutting him down for a long period of time and jeopardizing how his season is going to go, but you also open up the idea of, yeah, he's going to pitch fine in October for you. And that is really the value here, because everyone's asking, man, when Rhett Lowder comes back, who's the odd man out? When Hunter Greene comes back, who's the odd man out? Is Rhett Lowder the odd man out whenever he comes back? There's all these different questions, and as Dusty Baker once said, they usually work themselves out, but the value of this will really be in actually managing the workload for Chase Burns, because you can't ignore that. You cannot Mark Pryor or Kerry Wood Chase Burns right now. This dude has got such a promising career ahead of him. It is clear. He's got the stuff. He's got the makeup. He's ready to just absolutely be an asset for this team for however long they're able to keep him, and then have himself an individually fantastic career. And so with all of that, you have a responsibility, not just to him, but to your franchise as a whole, to manage his workload this year. Because there are plenty of aspirations for this team, yes. But if Chase Burns has to burn out his arm for the Reds to reach those aspirations, then those aspirations really weren't that close. And I don't think that's the case. I think we've seen Nick Lodolo take some good steps, and hopefully here soon he's going to just prove to us all that he is back. Andrew Abbott feels like he should. And then Chase Burns is clearly an ace of this staff. Whenever Hunter Greene comes back, he'll be an ace of this staff. And then as we move along, will Rhett Lowder kind of fill into the scouting report that we had seen whenever he was drafted? Will we see some more from Brandon Williamson down the road? He continues to be on the 60-day IL. I don't necessarily know that a return is imminent for him. But there's good news that abounds in all of that. And the Reds just got Caleb Ferguson back in the bullpen, so it feels like the bullpen is kind of getting whole now. I just say all this to say that I think that things are really trending up for the starting rotation and for the pitching staff as a whole. And with the way that the lineup is hitting, albeit they couldn't seal the deal, they got plenty of guys on base. In Wednesday's series finale loss to the Mets, I still feel good about the lineup. It feels like the Reds are getting themselves into a position where what we hope can be a reality. And I love to see that. Coming up next, Ryan Finkelstein from Locked On Mets joins me and gives us the answer to the question about team building and just how much is enough to spend on a good team. Without risk of giving Reds ownership too much ammo. I am curious, and so I wanted to bring in Ryan Finkelstein from Locked On Mets to kind of discuss this with us, because as we watch the Mets and the Reds in this series, we're seeing two different teams as far as payroll is concerned, albeit they do share a love of mascots with baseball heads. But when it comes to the rosters and how they are built, it is vastly different. And so, Ryan, the main question that I wanted to ask you is, how much money is enough to build a baseball roster? Because there are those who would say the key reason that the Reds are not that good over the last, my lifetime, is just because they don't spend enough.
Yeah, I think if you look at the Mets right now, it would be a great case for all teams to not spend, because so many of the decisions they have made have blown up in their face. And I think the difference with a big market team and a smaller market team is that you can kind of every year go for it. And I think for the Mets, maybe at some point over the past 5 years or 6 years since Steve Cohen took over, there should have been a official rebuild where you could have, gotten some bad money off your books. But instead, if you're constantly re-upping on the team, there's constantly bad money that's on the books that's always ballooning your payroll, like, whatever, I think $17 million this year to old Frankie Montas. So I just think that it's
another thing the Reds and Mets share in common.
Yeah, I think it just compounds itself when you are constantly going for it, and you're also just kind of getting rid of past mistakes, trying again, and it just ends up with this bloated payroll. And then when you're bad, people are going to point right back to that payroll and say, how is this team this bad when they spend this much money? But I think, as you've probably seen the last couple of days, this is not a lineup that looks like a $400 million team that the Mets are putting out there.
No, and I know that there's definitely a lot of injuries, and I know Steve was doing a victory lap whenever he saw that Luis Robert got put on the 60-day IL, because he was absolutely against that from the beginning of the rumor 3 years ago that the Reds were possibly going to trade with the White Sox to get him. But on top of that, I mean, Lindor's there. You've got a number of different guys. Polanco, I think, is on the injured list as well. So that definitely exacerbates it all. But even from a Reds standpoint, there are a lot of people that are questioning Nick Krall and his big moves, as it were, because those guys are Jeimer Candelario and Ke'Bryan Hayes. And at least until here recently, ever since he came off the IL, he seems to be hitting better. But Eugenio Suarez is a big-time money deal for this team, and yet he's dealt with injury. He's dealt with inefficiency so far this season. But the guys who are really going are Major League Minimum JJ Bleday and spring training invite with a minor league roster or a minor league contract Nate Lowe, and so things like that. Like it's a weird split where it's like the big money stuff isn't quite working out, the little money stuff is surprising everybody, and so I think that ultimately the performance evens out a little bit. And so I guess it's intriguing to me to see how both of our teams build their rosters, because the other part of this is how the front office moves. And the Mets hired David Stearns. They brought him in from Milwaukee because Milwaukee knows what they're doing. There's ample evidence to prove that. The Reds, on the other hand, promoted from within, and they promote from within just about my entire life. I don't remember the last time. Well, all right, guy from St. Louis whose name is blanking. I'm forgetting his name at the moment, but that's the only time I can think of that they went outside the team to make a front office hire to lead it. And so I think that for me is where the biggest difference lies, especially when you look at the Mets. It's like David Stearns kind of feels like the big cog in this, because as you've made your point on your show multiple times, fire the manager, sure, but if you fire the manager, then you're still trying to figure out why on the heck you got to give at bats to Eric Wagaman.
Yeah, no, it's like you mentioned, the injury bug for the Mets has been a huge issue, but it's also so many decisions that have gone the wrong way. And I think David Stearns in the past was really good at operating a small market team and finding those guys, that other teams overlooked. And then all of a sudden there's value. I think the Mets have done a nice job with that under David Stearns. There's been guys like Luis Torrens, who was picked up off of waivers, essentially a waivers trade or it might have been a waiver trade, but a minor league trade. He's turned into one of the better backup catchers in baseball. Signing Clay Holmes, a reliever as a starting pitcher, worked out until he broke his leg a couple weeks ago. But I think when you have the budget, you then are able to shop in all these markets. And I think what I've learned from watching the Mets spend is that top of the market in free agency, it could be just as predictable as the bottom of the market. You never know what you're going to get, especially when you're playing in a big market. You might think Bo Bichette is guaranteed to hit with runners in scoring position because he's done it his whole career, but put a pressure of $126 million 3-year contract on him, and he might not get the same results that you've been expecting.
I wonder a little bit too, and don't necessarily want to go too crazy with this whole idea because we'll talk about it quite a bit during the offseason. But as the whole idea of a potential lockout or at the very least some sort of CBA battle is going on, do you think that there's any sort of movement this season, seeing how some big market and small market teams are operating, that they might not go for a salary cap?
I think that what the Mets have done building this roster is they are protecting themselves against the possibility of a salary cap, and nobody kind of knows what's going to happen. By avoiding long-term deals like the Plague this last offseason, which I think was a big mistake when you could have just brought back Pete Alonso instead of giving Bo Bichette the $42 million a year and giving Jorge Polanco a 2-year deal worth $20 million per. Instead of looking towards 5-year deals, the Mets were trying to shed long-term deals like Brandon Nimmo's money, I think because of that possibility that there is a salary cap, or if not, a more punitive luxury tax that just makes it harder and harder to hold the payroll over $350 million. So I think that's why the Mets and the Dodgers were both kind of operating under that shorter term window in free agency this past season of trying to get deals that are 2 to 3 years, try to have deals that have opt-outs. So maybe players will come off your books because they have a good season. I think that's what was behind it, but I don't think anybody truly knows right now if we're going to get a salary cap or we're going to get what I think happens, which is, again, a more punitive luxury tax, which is just going to penalize these teams more and more if they spend, where now instead of the draft capital you're already giving up to sign a qualified offer free agent as a luxury tax team, maybe it's even worse. And if you are a repeat offender, you have to pay even more in penalties and everything else. I think they're going to keep on trying to handcuff these teams, but it might get to a point that to be able to have a farm system, you have to kind of follow these rules. I think that's why the Mets kind of spent the way they did.
Yeah, that's going to be the part of this argument for the Reds is kind of flipped, because I almost don't think that they care about a salary cap. What they're worried about is a salary floor, because as Steve and I sort of discussed yesterday, it's not necessarily the ownership group is so worried about how much they're going to spend. They set a number and the front office follows it, and that's just kind of how they operate. And everything else from there is gravy. How many games they win, the attendance, all that other stuff. It's going to be how much money do they have to spend, full stop, is going to be the biggest question for them. So that's going to be something that I know for a fact. If there's going to be a fight for a cap, there's going to be a fight for the floor. And then the players are going to be over here just like, yo, we don't want any of this. We just kind of like how things are rolling right now.
Yeah.
And it's going to be weird. I look at some of these things with a little bit of a raised eyebrow of how this season is going and think, is this playing into somebody's hand, or is this just more of the same of what we've seen for the last decade or so? And they're really positioning themselves for all of this. Unfortunately, that's in my mind.
Yeah, I'm working right now for Just Baseball on like a top 10 of the upcoming free agent class. It's a weak free agent class. It really is. I don't know if that's a coincidence or that's just how contracts over the past 3 years have kind of been structured, where players don't want to be a free agent this upcoming season. So guys like Nico Horner are grabbing contract extensions and making the market worse, or if it's just kind of coincidence. But it's going to be interesting because we are going to get, I think, a similar offseason to the 2021 the 2022 going to 2021 going to 2022 offseason, the last CBA, where we had like a deadline, which was kind of fun, where a lot of deals took place right before a lockout. And we could see that again, where guys are just grabbing contracts while they can, and that could create a really crazy market where a team like the Reds might say, you know what, there might be a floor. Let's grab this free agent before we can't. And maybe a team like the Mets says, I don't know if there's going to be a cap, so we can't spend right now. It could be kind of wild.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Reds part of your day. Really appreciate those who are everydayers. If you're not an everydayer, hit that follow button right here on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app, because we're on all of them out there. Take us with you wherever you go. And now make sure you check out Locked On MLB. We've got 3 different shows covering the league every single day for you over there, with 3 different views of the league each and every day on the Locked On MLB channel. Coming up on tomorrow's show, Steve will be back with me, and like I mentioned, we will discuss a lot of key things like Noelvi Marte and Hector Rodriguez and how much longer will they stay in AAA, and we'll get you set for the weekend ahead with the Atlanta Braves. But until then, you can always trust that Tim Daniel, Steve, and myself will be Locked On Reds every single day.